I spent a few hours at a historic site to do some sketching and painting. Plein air and urban sketching is still quite challenging for me, and I'm not all that happy with the result. So in this video I'd like to share some of the difficulties I've faced and the lessons I've learned. My first location was this cluster of buildings with the big chimney sticking out at the top. And that was my first mistake. Even though I started off with a little value sketch just to get the composition right, it proved to be a really challenging subject. Now, I struggle with buildings at the best of times, so choosing that as my first painting was really not a smart idea. And you can see the sketch is quite stiff and laboured. I had to spend a lot of time getting the perspective right and straight lines and erasing multiple roof lines. It wasn't really a good way to get loose and into my day of sketching and painting. My next challenge was working on my easel. It's at a much more vertical angle than what I usually paint on, and you can see how the paint just runs all over the painting, which sometimes is okay, but I really tried to get that roof to stay clean, and it made it quite dirty and muddy. And yes, I could have probably adjusted the angle, but I also tried to film it while I was painting, and I think I just tried a little bit too many new things at the same time. The lesson there is to either practice at home on an easel before I go out painting, or just go out painting more, or making sure that I have my equipment set up at the right height and angle. My next mistake was not starting over at this point. I realized that the composition was a bit off, that building in the right is too imposing and my chimney is right in the middle of the painting, dividing my page in half, and those first few colors, they just didn't flow nicely. And if I had any hope that this painting would turn out the way that I wanted it to, I should have realized after I painted this ugly grey fence that it was time to abort the mission and start over. And you might think, Patrick, this is a great sketch. What are you talking about? I wish I could paint like this. And thank you for thinking or saying that, but it didn't match up with my expectations and what I set out to achieve. And that's really my benchmark. I mean, just look at this tree. So the lesson here is really a life lesson to not be afraid to abandon a bad project or a bad painting. Cut your losses, try again as early as you can. Now, to counteract pessimistic Patrick, I'll tell you what I do like about this little painting, and that is those red flowers that I just dotted in on the trees. That really lifted the painting, and that was sort of a flash of inspiration right at the end. So maybe that was my redemption, that I wouldn't have gotten to that point in the painting if I'd abandoned it earlier. I also had tremendous fun using my little dagger brush there. I've only had it for a few days, and there is a video where I've done a quick review of it. It's great for tree branches and for grass textures. Let's move on to the next painting and some more lessons. For my second location, I picked something that I was a bit more familiar with and more in my comfort zone, which was this lovely view from the top of the hill. And I'm actually quite happy with the final painting as such, but there's still a few things that I could have done better. To start with, I was so confident that I knew what I was doing with this kind of subject that I didn't bother with a thumbnail sketch or a little value study. But as a result, I'm kind of lacking a clear focal point for this painting. There's this little headland in front of me that has some beautiful rocks and a cliff face, but I moved it to the left of the painting. You can see me sketching it there, which is a really awkward position for a focal point. And it's also facing to the left and therefore blocking off the whole right part of the painting. And to make matters worse, I was also quite careless when I drew those rocks. And when I get around to painting them, I didn't really have a clear idea about where the light and dark sides of those rocks are, and therefore missed an opportunity to make those rocks the focal point of the painting. As a result, I had to paint in a little ferry that's chugging away there in the top, just to create something for us to look at. So the lessons here: always do a thumbnail or a value sketch and be clear about your focal point. For my third attempt of the day, I chose a Goldilocks position where I had a big view with the harbour, but also some buildings in there that didn't require quite as much detail. And just like the second painting, I'm reasonably happy with the outcome, but there are still a few things I could have done better. And to start with, I also didn't do a sketch, thumbnail or value study for this one and just went in all guns blazing, super confident that I know what I'm doing. What specifically attracted me to this subject was the muted colors of the late afternoon on a cloudy day, but there was this warm glow still on the horizon, but everything else was kind of natural colors, and then those roofs were all connected and created this nice light versus dark contrast. A quick value study would have helped me really be clear about what is dark, light and medium value, but I sort of thought that I can see it right in front of me, so I started painting. And so I fell into the trap of painting local colors, meaning the colors of the objects as I see them in front of me. So I made a red brick house and painted my grey roofs and then some yellow buildings, and forgot all about painting in values rather than colors. Just look how faithfully I'm painting this red tiled roof here. So instead I could have used a much more constrained color palette and maybe even do a monochrome study with just a hint of orange for that evening glow. And speaking of that red brick building, that's my second big point of contention in this painting, is that I've added way too much detail for this house. It doesn't have a lot of significance in the composition. I really wanted the viewer to be pulled down the hill, through the roofs, into the evening sky across the harbour. Instead, I got carried away with little steps and windowsills, and in the end attracts way too much attention. In contrast, the level of detail I'm adding to this building a bit further down the hill is much better. A few blobs, a couple of lines, that's all we need to recognise it as a building. But as a reward, I got to use my little dagger brush again in the end to add some leaves and grass and details. And there are definitely some parts of the sketch that I really like. The lesson for me with this painting is, well, the same as for the other two. Be clear about your values before you start painting, be clear about your focal point, but also take a moment to really look at what's in front of you and what opportunities do you have to not paint the local colors as you see them, but create an atmosphere or a mood by choosing an unusual color palette or even doing a monochrome study instead of painting the colors as you see them. But of course I had a fabulous day out painting and I can't wait to do it again. This was just a bit of a critical look at my work and making sure that I learn from my mistakes. Let me know in the comments what are your struggles with outdoor sketching and if you like this type of content.